Hello, my name is Colleen Reynolds, and I'm teaching Art 127 with Western Nevada College in Carson City, Nevada. This is the lecture video for your first lesson, which is Getting Started. What we'll discover in this lesson is first, welcome to watercolor. Watercolor is a fabulous medium. It does take a little bit of learning and practice, but ultimately it's a very exciting and pleasant medium to work with. We'll go over some of the supplies required in general in this lecture note. We'll go over some general art and watercolor terms that you'll need to know. We'll discuss different painting methods. We're going to talk about the properties of pigment, and this is really going to be the guiding overview of the course, is all the different properties of watercolor pigment. And then I'll give you a preview of the lesson that comes next. Okay, so first you need supplies. To get started immediately, you're going to need paint, paper, palette, and brushes. Really, you only need one brush. So let's talk about paint. In general, make sure you get professional grade watercolor pigment. Professional brands, and when you look at the supplies list, I'll list a few brands that are available locally and online. In general, Daniel Smith, Winsor Newton, Holbein, M. Graham, those are all wonderful professional grade brands. Be careful with Winsor Newton Cotman, that's their student grade version, and Grumbacher and Blick brands tend to be a little substandard and they'll be frustrating for you. For paper, buy only professional grade watercolor paper. The most economical way to buy it is by the full sheet, which is 22 inches by 30 inches. That's available locally, or at least in Reno, at Nevada Fine Art. They have all the three types of paper, which is hot press, cold press, and rough, as well as the three weights of paper, 90 pound, 140 pound, and 300 pound. We will generally be using 140 pound cold press for the most part, but there will be a few lessons where you need hot press and rough, one lesson each. You also need a palette. If you look at your picture here, this is a palette. It holds your paint. I recommend something that kind of has a lid or a folding thing, and we'll get into that in the supplies list when we look through that lesson. But you need a way to protect it in transit, and you need mixing areas. These are mixing areas, these are wells. So at least 15 wells and 3 mixing areas that are separated specifically so the water can't flow between. For brushes, you really only need one brush. I recommend the Low Cornell number 14 round. It's a synthetic, it's not very expensive, and it has a really nice point to it. Again, that'll be in your supplies list. There's going to be some miscellaneous other supplies like water containers, towels, etc. Again, look at your supply list. It has a very detailed list of them: pencil, pens, eraser, ruler, things like that. And then in lesson 6, we're going to bring in some auxiliary materials. Most of these supplies you'll find in your kitchen or your household. Hopefully you don't have to go out and buy too much for lesson 6, but it is the final regular lesson. So let's go over now some general terms that you'll need to be familiar with to get through all the rest of the lectures and lessons. So first we're going to be thinking about a color wheel. We're going to be working in color right from the get-go. So you need to be familiar with the color wheel. So we kind of set up our colors in a wheel, as you can see over here on the right picture. From red, we have an anagram that helps us remember all the important colors. Roy G. Biv, which means red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. That's a combination of primary colors, which are colors that you can't mix, that you need to have, red, yellow, and blue, and secondary colors, which are the mix of primaries in some way. So if we mix red and yellow, we get orange. and that's an even mix. If we add a little red to the orange, we get a tertiary color, which we call red-orange. If we add a little yellow to the orange, we get yellow-orange. So we always refer to a tertiary mix with the primary color first. So instead of orange-red, it's red-orange. Also, if we mix red and blue, we get a violet, and if we mix violet with red, we get red-violet. If we mix violet with blue, we get blue-violet. And so on, the last secondary combination is green. It's a mix of yellow and blue. If you mix green with blue, you get a blue-green. If you mix green with yellow, you get a yellow-green. So we refer to all of those mixes of a secondary and a primary, a secondary and a primary gets a tertiary color. So by definition, a tertiary color is a mix of a primary and a secondary color. A secondary is a mix of two primary colors. There is a special set of tertiary colors where we mix a red and we go to the opposite side of the color wheel and mix it with green, which still follows the definition, a primary and a secondary. We get a special set of tertiary colors that we call neutrals. We want to be very aware of what the complementary combinations are. So a red and a green are complementary, yellow and violet are complementary, and orange and blue are complementary. But some of the tertiaries are also complementary. So if I take yellow-orange, the complement is blue-violet. So we want to go directly across the color wheel. Those are complementary colors. And that's a very special relationship that we want to be aware of. So some more general terms. We're going to talk about value a lot, but most especially in the next lesson. But we want to think about how dark or light our colors are. So we have some that are high value. So when I say high value, it's like highlight or closer to light or white. And then we have middle value or middle gray tones, and then low value colors that are darker or closer to black. So we want to think about our colors in terms of value a lot as we learn to paint. Another term we need to know is called reflected light. So that means a color that's absorbed between objects. So if you look over here at this painting of grapes, you can see that the grape is here, or the circle or sphere is here, and it's sitting on a surface, and that color is going to be reflected onto the other object that it's sitting on, and vice versa. If this is a gray surface, that gray color is going to be reflected into this object. So they will absorb each other. So if you have a black table, some of the black will be reflected to the bottom of the grape, and some of the grape will be reflected onto the gray surface. So we want to be conscious of that and really see that when we're painting. Another term we're going to talk about extensively is color harmony. Color harmony in general is the theory that certain color combinations are aesthetically pleasing to the human eye. So we'll go through about 4 different color harmonies, 3 of which will just be part of your assignments in some way or another. Another term that you need to understand is glazing. What glazing means is to paint transparent color over color. So if I put a layer of watercolor down and let it dry, and then I put another layer on top of that, that's considered glazing. And what that does is it increases the value or makes it darker or closer to a black whenever we layer color. It's another term for glazing. Or we can create a whole new color. So if I put a yellow layer down and then glaze over the top of it with a red layer, now I'm going to get an orange color. That's what happened here. This is a yellow layer here, glazed over the top would be, with red, we'll turn it orange. So you really will want to understand the properties of pigment. So I'll go through these one at a time, and each lesson or each property will be a unique lesson. Almost some of them will be combined in one lesson, but we'll go through these very carefully. So hue is just the color name. So we have two reds here, and we want to be able to distinguish between these two reds. One of them is Pyrrole red, one of them is quinacridone rose. So we need to know the specific color name or hue in order to distinguish which red we're talking about. And we'll get into the distinctions and what those mean as we go along. But you'll need to know your hue or color name. Cobalt blue violet, how is it different from rose of ultramarine? How is cascade green different from sap green? And so on. We've talked about value already. It's a measure from light to dark of a color. It's both between colors and within a color. So if you see this red, for instance, it's darker here and lighter here. That's called a tonal range of color, and we'll get into that in the next lesson. But in general, which of these colors is the darkest of all? Probably this cobalt blue violet is the darkest color, especially as compared to its complement, which is these lighter value yellows. So we want to be conscious both the local color, how it relates to the grayscale, as well as a tonal range, getting a range from light to dark in a particular pigment. Temperature is another pigment property that's extremely important to understand in all painting media, especially watercolor, because how you mix temperatures will result in different mixes of secondary and tertiary colors. So if you want to learn how to stay away from muddy and murky colors, you'll need to understand the temperature. I'm not going to go into it in depth in this lesson because there will be a whole lesson on that. But essentially we want to refer to a color as either warm or cool. Overall, red and yellow are warm and blue is cool. But within a color, within this red, some of the colors are warmer than other colors within the red tones. Same within the yellow tones, same within the blue tones, same within the green tones. So we're going to really talk about whether a color is warm or cool, and remember that it's relative. Okay, intensity is a measure of bright to dull. So if you think of a neon sign, that's really super bright, and then if you think of black or gray, that's fairly dull. The intensity of a color is really important. When we get into why all these matter, intensity will be important when we're trying to create a sense of distance in our paintings. Transparency, especially in watercolor, is extremely important. It applies to all painting media, but it's especially important in watercolor. Virtually all the colors are to some degree transparent, but some are more transparent than others. And what we mean by transparent is we can see through it like glass, compared to opaque, which is not see-through at all. So in this, we have a black line, and we're going to paint over the black line, and that's going to help us determine whether a pigment is transparent or see-through or opaque or somewhere in between. And it's really important for glazing and building up layers of value and color. We also want to know the staining quality of a pigment. So if you see on the inside here, it looks like this person, which was me, tried to lift the color. Sometimes it's really frustrating because a paint will stick to the paper and you can't lift it back. Like if you look at this manganese blue, you can see I tried to get back to white and I can't. I can lift it a little bit, but I can't get nearly as far back close to white as I could in these three colors, or especially this one and this one. So we'll want to know which ones of our colors are staining and which ones are lifting, so we can know what to do when we're painting. And finally, we want to know about the granulation quality of our pigments, whether it is textured or smooth. So again, the last lesson on texture, we'll get into granulation. In Lesson 5, we'll get into the staining quality and the transparency of our pigments. In Lesson 3, we'll get into temperature and intensity. And in Lesson 2, we'll cover value. So for this lesson, you're going to learn some painting methods. We're going to concentrate on brush control this time, just to get the brushes wet and painting on paper. We're going to talk what I call the S caress. So in general, you want to keep a light touch and keep your brush moving and not repeat areas. So I'm going to talk about this more in depth in the next slide. So for painting methods, we really want to talk about brush control. We're going to use what I call the S caress. This is to help you understand how to avoid doing some sort of bad habits. So the S describes the motion, the caress describes the pressure. So if you move in an S-like motion, that keeps you from worrying the same spot or patting, so brushing, coming off the paper, brushing it again, going over the same spot a little bit. So we really kind of want to avoid that. The caress describes the pressure. So you want to learn to have a very light touch on your brush. You don't want to rough up the surface of the paper too much by pressing really hard. So you want to try to almost skim the surface of the paper. So we're going to practice some calligraphy strokes. If you think of Asian painting and writing, those are all using calligraphy strokes. And we're going to learn some practice strokes, and there will be a video demonstrating this. So you're going to practice the pull push, the side, and smush strokes. The pull stroke is this line stroke. The pull push is more like the leaf stroke, so you're going to push and then pull off. A side stroke will give you the bamboo stroke. So this is a pull, push, pull stroke. This is a line or a pull stroke, and then finally a smush stroke that gives us the little orchid flowers. And you'll be required to create a simple orchid or bamboo design. You're only required to turn in one of them. So be sure you watch the demonstration videos in assignment 1. Here's some student examples of an orchid and a bamboo painting by previous students. So in summary then, by the end of this lesson, you will have secured all the required supplies and equipment. I wouldn't delay in getting those supplies if you haven't already, especially in an accelerated term. You will have established your semester theme. This is something that is personal to you, that you're passionate about, that can be depicted pictorially. You'll understand some general watercolor terms. You will learn the S caress and calligraphy techniques, and you will have submitted your work for assignment 1, which includes a written theme, the S caress practice, just one image, and a bamboo or an orchid composition that you will take a picture of and upload. So please be sure to watch the video on how to navigate in Canvas, especially this first assignment. So for next lesson, we'll discuss the watercolor property of value. We'll talk about 2 new methods of painting, a flat wash and a graded wash. And we'll discuss the art concepts of monochromatic harmony, figure versus ground, positive painting, and we'll discuss watercolor paper types more in depth. And that's it for this first lecture, Lesson 1, Getting Started. Good luck, have fun. Be sure to ask me questions early if you run into any issues.